now at leadership, in particular. The leadership ability to find your notes would be a good point. But I'm going to hand over now to Mike Higgins from Loughborough University, who's going to give us some insights on the research that he's been doing, or himself and his team, focusing on elite sport organisations, but looking at performance, looking at leadership, and how leadership can grow, how leadership can evolve, and hopefully take root in values and purpose. And I think that's probably a theme that a lot of us in this room have, and a lot of people at home have. So I'll hand you over to Mike, and the good news for the rest of you is there's less of me in the afternoon. So,
and there's lunch after me.
Yeah, so
yeah. So it's great to be here at the Lowry. I feel like I've come full circle because some of my earliest sporting memories were being taken to Swinton Rugby League Football Club in Pendlebury by my granddad, who every time we walked there, he'd proudly tell me that Lowry lived on my street. So we've closed that there. We all know how important leadership is in sports organisations, but do we really know how leadership is developed? And do we really know how the nature and context of sport influences what we need from our leaders? Well, in early 2020, we set about a major research project to understand this, seeking to work with and learn from the world's best sport leaders and organisations. And then in March 2020, we all know what happened. We've heard about how things stopped. The world stopped. Sport stopped. And our project, well, actually, it didn't stop. In fact, it was turbocharged. Because as a result of the slowdown in sport, we were able to talk to some of the most influential and knowledgeable people across world sport and work with them over the next 2 years. Yeah. So just looking at some of the organisations that we spoke to over there, people from the Olympic and Paralympic system, from UK sport, across England Rugby, the FA, LTA, the support services, people at the English Institute of Sport and their equivalents overseas, and people in major leagues in the UK and nationally, including things like the Big Bash League, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. We spoke to, it's actually now a network of over 150 leaders, and this includes chairs, independent non-exec directors, CEOs, CAOs at various organisations, national performance directors, sports directors, national head coaches, and heads of performance. We talked to leaders with sustained performance leadership experience at world, European, and national level, people who'd worked and delivered across multiple Olympic cycles and World Cups, starting from the 2003 Rugby World Cup and leading all the way through recent successes in football. And leadership, we spoke to leadership teams planning for performance and beyond in 2022. And we spoke to them about the future challenges and opportunities for leadership in sports organisations, how expert leaders really develop over time, which experiences had the most impact and why, and how sports organisations should be developing their future leaders to sustain high performance in changing environments. So what did we find out? So we're going to look at 3 areas. Which are the factors influencing sport leadership and its development? We're going to talk through a model for leadership in sport, which is also applicable across business and the wider world. And then we're going to talk about what we found out about how leaders really develop. It's a whistle-stop tour in 30 minutes or so, covering some research that was done over 3 or 4 years, and I'm happy to expand on any area with people and organisations as a follow-up. So what were the issues the senior leaders I spoke to felt were key challenges and opportunities? Well, these were in 3 areas. The nature of elite sport and how this shapes the leadership needs of sports organisations, including what makes leadership different and how the complexities of sport drive specific leadership requirements. The changes needed in sport culture, noting we're in a key transitional period for sport, leading with purpose, not solely focused on process and production, and driving beneficial culture change where needed. And then we talked about the next evolution of sport leadership, And just looking at these in a bit more detail, sport is a complex area. Today we've been talking across everything from environmental issues to governance to leadership to performance to entertainment to sponsorship. It's a highly complex area. There's a huge variation in the type, size and scope of sports organisations, just from multi-billion-pound football franchises down to local community organisations. Each of these organisations has a range of different drivers, be that participation, membership, commercial, performance and governance drivers. We've already talked today and discussed the importance of understanding your stakeholders. And those stakeholders, some of the larger ones, will have particular funded requirements. That could be National Lottery, UK Sport or Sport England. People have investor requirements. Some of the Premier League companies are owned by private equity companies. These stakeholders have a high power and influence, and that includes fans, members, and others. And as one, linking to something that Georgina said earlier about understanding your stakeholders, as one national performance director of a national sports body said to me, as a CEO or performance director or board member in this space, you have to lead and make decisions about people who are lifelong, passionate participants. Whether they're, international level or club level, they will not listen to you at a point in crisis unless they can look at you and know that you understand their world and truly care about it. When it really matters, there are things at stake that people care about, and unless you understand the mindset of people who define themselves by a particular sport, you will fail. Strong words. Other issues in elite sport is that very much in national governing bodies you have two worlds of performance and participation. The performance world varies considerably across sports depending on the competitive cycles and the cadence of that sport, from 4-yearly cycles in Olympics through to the almost daily plays that you have in the NBA and Major League Baseball. In some areas this can be a closed world, and many of the performance directors we spoke to talked about a lack of check and challenge, which they thrive on, but they don't get because the boards don't include enough people with world-class programme experience. But boards are evolving, and this is something that we're all involved in. Boards are changing in type and composition, moving from members and committees through to portfolio-based boards and diverse boards. There are still gaps, this still leads to certain gaps in sport experience and capability. We still recognise that there are changes needed in sport culture. We can, as a sport, become over-focused on process. These are the thoughts of leaders in sport, not myself. And that we too often resort to what we call process-based reactions rather than understanding people. And in many areas, we're just managing and not leading. But we're in a transitional period for sport, and there's a wider role for the importance of culture and environment, although there are still some significant gaps in understanding culture. Is it something that can be measured even? So we moved on to looking at what's the next evolution for sport leadership, and what did all these leaders in world sport think that was? So after speaking to hundreds of people and working with organisations, we began to frame this as sustainable performance leadership. Now, just coming on after talking about environmental sustainability, here I'm talking about sustainable as in you're creating a repeatable, continual and reinforcing process where you're getting in performance, meaning that you're getting the best out of groups of people consistently and more than they're capable of individually. And this is focused in 3 areas: leading performance, developing thriving cultures and growing leadership capacity. We define sustainable performance leadership as influencing others to achieve higher levels of performance in a sustainable manner, which grows the capacity of the individual, team, organisation, sport and system. And this is applicable across all areas of the sport system. This leadership needs to be focused on a clearly understood and communicated purpose and aligned to shared values translated into leadership principles. Now, these aren't just words, these are things that really have to happen. The purpose has to be communicated, and that has to be aligned to values at individual, team and organisational level. And this has to be clearly communicated in terms of leadership principles. And leadership should be focused on the achievement of organisational performance and strategic goals by individuals and teams thriving in an environment of high challenge and high support. And we'll come on to that a bit later. So in this way, leadership is focused on improving performance. It's growth and development orientated. It's about creating a capacity for leadership around a purpose, which is the vision and mission of what people talk about, the VMOS, vision, mission, objectives, strategies and tactics. It's values-based and actions are aligned to those values, and it's focused on developing thriving environments. So if we look at leading performance here, in terms of leading, and this applies to all organisations as well as elite high-performance sports, this needs a range of behaviours and skills which are held by individuals, teams and organisations. Leadership's so complex, there isn't just one model or one kind of framework for leadership which people can apply. You need to be looking at having certain behaviours and skills and developing those in people. That's ethics, behaviours in terms of ethics, empowering, vulnerability, being purpose-driven, caring, kindness, agility, adaptability, creativity. These are all things that coming out of the pandemic we all need to do more of and are doing more of as leaders. We need to encourage well-being and be less risk-averse. And you need to, again, encourage high challenge, high support. The kind of skills that leaders need going forward are really just high-level people skills. It's all about the people. High-level communication skills, creating highly performing cultures, understanding team dynamics, collaboration, managing stakeholders, and storytelling and story making. Someone who leads in this way has to have certain qualities, all of which can be developed through experience development and exposure. And these qualities include a deep understanding of human performance, which we all need, because we lead people, we don't lead inanimate objects. Someone who leads with authenticity, clarity, and purpose. Someone who has a clearly communicated leadership philosophy. Some of the leaders that we've worked with claim to have a leadership philosophy. And when we said, how do you communicate that to the people you lead? They said, well, I don't. I said, well, how can that be a philosophy? How can you lead them if they don't know how they're going to be led? So we work with people to develop that. Someone who knows the person, team, individual differences and motivations. Within sport and organisations, some people are having good days, bad days in certain things. You need to know the person behind the role that you're leading so that you can deliver the leadership that's needed to them. A performance leader needs to be constantly learning and share their knowledge freely. Needs to be a great communicator and teacher. They need to be open and vulnerable, which can be difficult in high-performance sports. And they need to be highly developmentally focused. And it's someone who plans progressive goal-based development for leaders that they have on their own pathway. So this is someone who's got their values aligned, they're highly self-aware and expert communicator. And all of these things like knowing the person, communicating, being development-focused. It's very much like a coach here, and I don't mean an executive coach, I mean like a sports coach who's developing people and has a real passion for developing people that they're leading. In terms of developing thriving cultures, this is, leaders need to know how to build shared purpose and align values and create challenging environments, and this is a real skill. These environments need to develop resilience at individual, team and organisational level, and much of that is outlined in the recent SGA essay. And leaders need to be really good at intentionally creating a culture. People need to be able to define the culture that they want to create. It's okay going in and measuring a culture and seeing where it is, but you need to have a vision for what you want that culture to be, against which it can be measured, and against which people can be held accountable. And this needs to be focused on well-being and performance. So in terms of growing leadership capacity, This is a question that we asked ourselves, and really, how do leaders really develop? When we had this unprecedented access to hundreds of people, we really wanted to understand this. You can find a lot of papers on leadership development, and if you really, in academic circles, and if you really examine them, they're nothing better than an evaluation of a training course that a group of people may have been on. Did that course help you become a good leader? Yes, no, etc. Or you can read a lot of books about it, but that's their opinion and the message they want to give. What we wanted to do is talk to people in depth, especially in a period sort of post-COVID where they've had time to rest and reflect and things, and say, okay, well, how do you think you experience your own development as a leader? So we studied a number of expert leaders, asking them these questions. So the main study that we did is focused on 10 leaders within the elite high-performance system, including people in the UK and worldwide. You won't be able to read possibly what it says on there, but these are people who are performance directors in the Olympic and Paralympic system, chairs of national sports agencies, people who've been Olympians and who were performance directors, or national head coaches of sports that you will have seen over there on the TV this weekend and earlier. So we had in-depth reflective conversations and interviews with these people, and for the academics or psychologists or others out there, what we used was an interpretative phenomenological analysis. And I promised myself I'd buy myself a drink if I got those 3 words out without jumbling them. And what we asked them is, how do leaders experience their own development over time? Which experiences had the most impact and why? And we examined the nature of those experiences in depth. Now, I think I've got 10 minutes or so and a bit more to go through this, so that's why I've sort of rushed a bit, but hopefully you've taken something from earlier. And what we found was that not all experiences are equal. A lot of this might sound obvious when we talk it through, or it might seem insightful. Let's hope for the latter. But we found that there were 3 broad types of experience. There was what we're calling informative experience, so where someone got a bit of information, they learned something, it was added to their knowledge base, and it was useful, wasn't life-changing, but they're a real core part of developing as a leader, attending a conference, reading an essay, etc. We found that there were what we call formative experience, things that changed the way people do things, gave them new skills, gave them a sort of a change in direction in life, or where they were going, or helped them do a certain lead in a certain way, and they were formative. But we found that there were some really transformative experience that individuals had a few of over we're talking the course of some of them 2 or 3 decades of learning to be a leader. And we wanted to delve into these transformative and formative experiences with the leaders. Okay, we're missing ones. And we found that these transformative experiences and highly formative experiences occurred in 6 key areas. Early experiences, and I'll break down each of these in more detail in a minute. The influence of others in their development, the influence of environments in their development, constant learning, being on a planned progressive pathway, and recovery and reflection. And what we also found was that some experiences really counted, but after the fact, on reflection. There were some experiences that they didn't really realise until they'd gone through some kind of process and been able to reflect on that, either individually, collectively, or in a guided manner. So the time of the experience was important. So what we found that leaders were on a journey, and what we call it's an individually driven and externally supported and enhanced experiential learning journey. What we found was that there's no point going on this journey unless you have certain drivers and enablers present. At the individual level, that's got to be the desire to lead, motivation, drive, ambition, curiosity, passion, purpose, performance mindset, some drivers there at the individual level. At the organisational level, the environment needed to be good on challenge and support. People needed to have autonomy, and there needed to be certain environmental drivers of vision, strategy, and culture there to help them lead. And that was individual and organisational readiness. Tick that box, people can go on about, people can start developing as a leader. Early experiences. We interviewed these 10 people and more subsequently, and yes, people did have early formative and transformative experiences, being head girl at school, captain of the rugby team, doing certain things in the community. It wasn't important that these were at school or early on. It was important that these were foundational experiences of leading and also of being led. Just like at the bottom of the athletic pathway, you have to have foundational experiences to play at sport. They needed these experiences to build confidence and give them an opportunity to play at leadership. And this was developing a capability and capacity to lead. And for some of these leaders, this happened maybe 5-10 years into their first role. But in order to start developing as a leader, you need to have this chance to experiment. Other people were really important in people's development. Mentors was a real transformative experience for some people. There are 3 different types of mentors, which I'll cover briefly. But these people are giving guidance, support, knowledge, and importantly, opportunities to these leaders to grow. And observing others was good. Observing people, good, bad, indifferent. And then other people in people's leadership journeys, the important others that enable people to transform the way they thought about the world, had a coaching approach of high challenge and support. So just quickly looking at mentoring, what we found was that people had multiple mentors, using different people with different strengths, quite often had a succession of mentors. You might have all been there yourself. We found that there were 3 fundamental types of mentors. Those who were helping someone in their current role, so someone helping their performance, and that's the common focus of executive coaching, for example. Someone who was helping people for roles, and that's preparing for transitions. What we found there was that was a highly developmental phase where that person, that mentor, needed to be able to put the individuals under conditions of high challenge and support, so they had to be close to that person. They had to be giving them opportunities. One performance director talked about how his immediate line managers in a major Olympic sport gave them the chance to try things, but they always had their back. And that kind of highly developmental experiences can't be delivered to someone offline by an independent coach. And then there are people being mentored for growth with high potential. Environments were important in people's journeys. Environments can act as an enabler and inhibitor. We spoke to a leader whose development had been completely put on hold, despite all of their individual learning, passion for leadership, by the culture within their organisation that just didn't give them any kind of opportunity to grow, and they had to move abroad to get that. So, and fit with environment is very important. These environments need to be high challenge and high support. And these need to be performance environments where people thrive on feedback on everything that they do. And planning people's exposure to different types of environments was considered really important in people's development. So I don't know if all of you are familiar with the sort of challenge support matrix. So on the one side you've got like whether or not you challenge from, so it is high or low, and then whether the amount of support you're getting is high or low. In terms of the highly developmental environments, these are environments where there's high challenge and high support, where people are pushing you, where you're really having to develop, where you're being put slightly outside of your comfort zone, but you know that people have got your back. You know that they're going to let you fail. People who we've talked to had these transformative experiences had multiple failures in this kind of environment. They were highly developmental, but someone had their back. They weren't hung out to dry. You can develop in high challenge, low support, but it's an unrelenting environment and people don't last long there. You can develop in the comfort zone. This is where I think too much executive coaching happens, where it's very high support. Your executive coach is always very nice to you, but they don't see you in action, and often they don't challenge you at all. In terms of another common theme was constant learning. One of the leaders had been through a whole range of different roles in the UK sports system. it's an essential part of the evolution of the UK sports system. And what they said to me was that in their current role, they're still learning, and they're learning every day. They're learning about people first, then culture and environments, understanding themselves, others, organisations and systems. There's always something to learn. And this can be peer-to-peer. Team-based learning is really important. How many of you have gone off and done your leadership development on your own? Probably most people. How many people should go off and do their leadership development with the team that they work with? Most people, but it doesn't get done in that way, but it's starting to increase. And lastly, or not second to last, people should be on a planned progressive pathway of development, where just like some of the people I spoke to, very high up in the sports system, when we talked about how leadership was developed, they said, oh, we'd never develop our athletes this way, almost like chucking people in positions and giving them development, not really thinking about what people needed. Leaders need to be on a planned progressive pathway where the people are exposing them. And some of the leaders that we spoke to had their experiences curated by stakeholders in their development, whether it be by sports organisations or their own employers. That gives people the opportunity to curate the quality of exposure to environments that people need to develop. And there is an issue there between sometimes being thrown in at the deep end can work, but I think there's always a negative in terms of lack of planning versus planned. You'll always get something better if you planned it. I'll talk about pathway. I noticed in one of the handouts that was there was mine's gone blank, but it went from early to it was like different level of skills. How few organisations actually think of leadership development on a pathway. The best organisations do, and the best leaders develop when it's like this. We like to think about leadership as something that where you're managing a leadership talent pipeline, you're planning and curating experiences, the exposure to environment, and where the expert leader is a developer who is mentoring and coaching these leaders to develop them. So this whole leadership development piece is just thought of like the athletic development pathway, where you've got early leaders, practitioners, experts, and world class. When you take that even further, a bit like sport, you can plan your exposure, you can prepare, you can practice and get feedback in real time and develop performance. When you think about it, you can break this down, and we've done that into different skills by each area and different behaviours and different experiences that people need. Thankfully, I'm not going to go through all of that before your lunch. And then you've got a framework for developing leaders up and down a pathway. And lastly, possibly some of the most important was giving people the time for recovery and reflection. Sport is fast-paced. Many of the leaders we spoke to had the opportunity to take some time off, recover and reflect. And you need to be planning development and exposure of leaders in a way which gives people a chance to reflect on that experience and develop. That reflection can be collective, guided by people, can be use of executive coaches. So the outcomes of all of this are increased skill, increased capability, high self-awareness, and leaders developing a real identity and enjoying it. And essentially, they're having developed high-level people skills, specialists in leading people, teams, organisations. They become specialists in culture and specialists in environments. And that's what we believe a leader is. And then everyone should have their own leadership philosophy, which they communicate, which is based on their experiences, their values, their purpose, and their approach, and that should be communicated. So I'm going to whiz over that slide because it's just on that one and finish there because Jessica's dancing at me at the back. Okay, thank you.
That was really insightful. I think one of the questions I have though is you talked a lot about organisation and structures and external people supporting that leadership growth. Many sports organisations are really quite small. The opportunities for growing leaders through a period of time where people stay within roles can be quite challenging. I just wonder how you see that working within a lot of the smaller organisations that exist within the sector.
I think sometimes if I had more time, I'd love to sit down and write a magazine article or something, which is almost a bit like, when did we let line managers off the hook in terms of developing the leaders we need? Because when you go and talk to people about how they've developed and who's had the most impact on their development, it is more often than not a really good line manager who's acted in a really caring, developmental, completely open way, who's been passionate about growing the people in their organisation. And I think that applies in high performance through to voluntary organisations. And I think the more we move away from, the more we've moved towards an industry where people get sent away to develop, or they go and talk to coaches or other things. But I think line management and people within that person's developmental pyramid, for want of a better word, that's where the opportunity lies.
Hi. We were interested in the gender split of your two panels, the 150 and the 10,
Yeah.
and if there was any interesting insights about how the different leaders approached.
The split was 36% female leaders and the remainder were male. In terms of the study of 10 leaders, without getting into the whole thing of IPA, or whatever is interpretive phenomenon, is that you look at a very in-depth, a case-specific basis. And whilst I've collated it here into 6 themes. Now, I think we haven't examined differences in gender between them, because we wanted to remain focused on taking a step back and looking at leadership more broadly. And I think it's probably a get-out for me to say. I think there was more commonality in the people we spoke to, about people who genuinely wanted to be passionate, authentic leaders, than there were versus some people who perhaps, of the 100, there were people that we spoke to that perhaps didn't get it, but we didn't analyse whether that was gender specific, But it was representative. When we got to 36%, we were obviously sporting things called, like Target 30, etc., which are looking to get at least 30% of female leaders.
Okay. I don't have a microphone unless it can be switched on right now. So thank you, Mike, for a really interesting presentation. We will now break for lunch. Please do take the time to connect with one another. That goes for people who are joining us virtually. Please get on the app, connect with people that you'd like to make a connection with. For people who are here, we're going to be serving the food out there. You can eat it standing up, talking to each other, or come back in here, sit down, talk to each other. Do please make friends and talk to one another over lunch. I was going to ask you to pick up some reading and talk to my colleague Con, but you've definitely done the first one, which is brilliant for me because I had to lug it all back, anything that was left. Sorry, and Jess as well, not just me. We would have done it together. So thank you for taking that off our hands. Have a great lunch, and I'll see everybody at 1:45. Yes.